Hello everyone, welcome back to the Conflict Front Stories channel. Please subscribe and like my videos. Imagine waking up to the news that a longtime neighbor, once friendly but increasingly assertive, begins quietly mobilizing troops just across the border. The tension builds slowly, rumors spread, alliances shift, and then, with a thunderclap, war begins. That creeping dread, that rising uncertainty, that's where our story starts today, as we explore tensions in Eastern Europe, Moscow's role in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Let me take you back a bit. For decades after the breakup of the Soviet Union, the relationship between Russia and Ukraine was complex and fraught with history. Ukraine gained independence in 1991, but for many in Moscow, Ukraine remained part of a broader shared space, culturally, historically, and strategically. Over time, Ukraine began shifting westwards, flirting with European institutions, considering tighter ties with the West, and increasingly distancing itself from Russian influence. That shift deeply unsettled Moscow, which regarded Ukraine's drift toward Europe and the West as a direct threat to its sphere of influence and national security. Behind closed doors and in public rhetoric, Russian leaders argued that NATO's eastward expansion, and Ukraine's potential integration into Western structures, jeopardized Russia's strategic depth. Moscow saw Ukraine's alignment with the West not merely as a political shift, but as a geostrategic challenge, one that could enable foreign military infrastructure closer to Russia's borders. By 2014, tensions boiled over. A wave of pro-Russian unrest erupted across eastern and southern Ukraine, in Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Odessa, and other regions. These protests and violent clashes were supported, covertly and overtly, by Russian military and intelligence services. In Crimea, Moscow wasted no time. Unmarked troops moved in, and after a hastily arranged and internationally unrecognized referendum, Russia annexed the peninsula. Simultaneously, in eastern Ukraine, separatist insurgencies flared, particularly in the Donbass region, a strategy that destabilized Ukraine internally and undermined its Western orientation. That annexation and the years of simmering unrest set the stage for something far more expansive. In February 2022, Moscow escalated dramatically, launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. What Russia calls a special military operation, many regard as a brazen act of aggression aimed at reversing Ukraine's course, reasserting Russian dominance, and reshaping Eastern Europe's geopolitical order. So why does Moscow consider this war so vital? The answer lies in both strategic and symbolic importance. Strategically, Ukraine is enormous. A long land border with Russia, a key Black Sea coastline, access to Mediterranean routes, and a buffer zone protecting Russia's heartland. Controlling Ukraine gives Moscow a springboard to project power deeper into Europe, the Black Sea region, and beyond. Symbolically, many in Russia view Ukraine as the cradle of the old Slavic civilization, the historical birthplace of a shared identity, a legacy from the times of the medieval Kievan Rus, and later the Tsarist and Soviet eras. For Russian nationalists and the political elite, allowing Ukraine to slip irreversibly into the Western orbit is unforgivable, a loss of heritage and influence. Militarily, after 2022, the invasion has involved multiple fronts, from the north toward Kyiv, from the south via Crimea, and from the east and southeast into Donbass and other Ukrainian regions. Russia has employed a mix of ground forces, armored divisions, air support, drones, missile strikes, and cyber and hybrid warfare, hitting military targets. But also infrastructure, energy, and civilian areas across Ukraine. At the same time, beyond frontline fighting, Moscow has ramped up information warfare, cyber attacks, covert sabotage, disinformation campaigns and other hybrid tactics, aiming not only to shape battlefield outcomes, but to influence public opinion, fracture societies, destabilize Western support for Ukraine, and undermine confidence in European institutions. Internationally, the stakes are huge. The aggression has triggered a massive humanitarian crisis, waves of refugee flows, global economic disruption, and a fundamental shakeup in European security architecture. Moreover, Russia's invasion has forced other nations to choose sides, either support Ukrainian sovereignty, potentially provoking Moscow's wrath, or attempt neutrality and risk instability at their borders. For Moscow, this chaos and division is often part of the strategy. Yet, despite initial momentum, Russia has not achieved a quick, decisive victory. Over time, the war has turned into a grinding, protracted conflict. The first blitzkrieg-style thrust toward Kyiv failed, supply lines bogged down, and Ukrainian resistance, aided by Western military support, proved stronger than Moscow expected. As the priorities shifted, Russia recalibrated its strategy. Rather than swift conquest, it moved to a war of attrition, using bombardments, drones, and positional warfare, while sustaining a broader campaign of pressure across Ukraine and exerting influence beyond its borders throughout the post-Soviet space. This prolonged conflict, this tension, is about more than land or power. It's about identity, history, influence, and the reordering of Eastern Europe. For Moscow, undoing Ukraine's westward drift and restoring a sphere of influence means reaffirming Russia's role as a major global power. For Ukraine, resisting means preserving sovereignty, national identity, and the right to choose its own future. And for the rest of the world, the consequences are profound. Energy security, migration, alliances, global economy, and stability in a region that remains a tinderbox of old grievances, modern ambition, and geopolitical rivalry. As this war continues, the lines between military confrontation and political influence blur. The battle is not only fought on the ground, but in cities, cyberspace, media, supply lines, and diplomacy. Moscow's role remains central, not necessarily just as a military force, but as an architect of instability and a challenger to the post-Cold War order in Europe. If you'd like, I can also build into the script a timeline section, major milestones from 2014 until now, to show how the conflict evolved. Want me to draft that for you now?